Good evening, everyone. At this point, 5 minutes prior to the meeting, actually it's 6 minutes, we asked for any questions from the audience. Now, I want to point out, anyone wishing to speak to the notice on title or development variance permits under agenda items 4A, B, or C will be given an opportunity to speak when these items are addressed later in the meeting. So we'll leave it at that. Anyone wishing to speak can come down to the microphone.
Grant Donaldson, I live at 11 Drill
It's on
Drive.
tonight's agenda only, eh? Okay, understand that?
I understand. And you can feel free to correct me if I stray. I just have a couple of questions. The first one, looking at your minutes, the very first item on your agenda, or looking at the agenda, the very first item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes from the July 18th meeting. And I've looked at the minutes, and I do have a question related to item 7A under new business, the water main cost out. I was wondering why Councillor Oates is not listed as voting in favor and showing the vote is tied. And maybe I'm not familiar with how votes are shown.
Can anybody on staff answer that, or is that an omission? Because he did vote.
Yes, we don't record votes in favor. We only record votes opposed. And when a vote is tied, the motion is defeated, and that's what the minutes show. It show the motion being defeated. Oh.
It seemed to me that having attended the council meeting, and when a vote is tied at 3-3, I would have thought that the minutes would reflect that. Okay. On the subject of cost comparison, I look back at the engineer's report from the 18th of April.
Is that in the minutes?
It's in the adoption of the minutes.
What page are you on?
I'm on item 7A under new business of the July 18th minutes. And it's my understanding that because the adoption of the minutes from the July 18th meeting is the first item on the agenda for this evening, that questions can be raised with respect to the minutes of the July 18th meeting.
Mrs. Comis, that's not my interpretation.
Well, no, Your Worship. You asked a question about the item and how it was reflected in the minutes, and now you're raising a point from a previous council meeting that was not reflected in the minutes. So therefore, that part of it is not in order.
Okay. But I'd like to make one comment. When we attended this council meeting on the 18th of April, because we were interested, obviously, in one of the items on the agenda, which was the realignment proposed by the engineer, there was a large number of people here, and a gentleman from the Friends of Foster Park got about 10 minutes to speak to council right in this period of time. And the item was, there was nothing on the agenda to do with Foster Park. And so it leaves us at a loss, because Are you sure about that? Because it was my understanding that the bylaw had already been passed. So there's no possibility of us asking any further questions.
Well, the motion was defeated. I mean, what more?
Well, I guess
what more do you want to know? The motion was defeated.
Yeah, and I guess we're looking for some opportunity to speak in a public forum about our situation. And we were, on the 2nd of May, we were hustled out of the room and not allowed to speak, although we had been advised that because the adoption of the minutes, we could speak. Then our request to appear as a delegation was turned down, and now we're not being allowed to say anything this evening or ask any questions. So I guess from our perspective, we don't feel that we're being treated fairly, and so at least we can go on the record and say that we feel we're not being treated fairly, and we haven't had our opportunity to speak in this forum. And I'm surprised because of the advice that we've received from different people that says we can speak because it is on the agenda because of the adoption of the minutes. But although we have questions, I guess I've said my piece, and
Thank you. Your name and your address, please. Your name and address, please. Turn the microphone on, please. Just press the button.
Charles McNutt, 13 Trill Drive. I'm going to ask the question, I guess, based on the last meeting and item 7 on this motion. I would like to ask why a cost comparison was not completed for routing on the north versus south side of the ENN line at the start of the original design.
That was answered at the meeting, Mr. McNutt. I'm not going to go over it again.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was. I respectfully disagree with you. All of the councillors that voted against the motion, myself included, expressed those reasons why. So, I mean, the motion was defeated. That's the end of the story.
So we have no say whatsoever. I feel the council is elected to represent the taxpayers on this, and I feel you should take some of what we say into consideration. We spoke at that general meeting, or that open house, on November 5th, and we proposed a lot of things that might happen, and sure enough, they're happening, but it was not carried forward on our behalf, and we haven't got the answers yet.
As far as I'm concerned, all of the questions that were raised and the concerns that were raised have been answered.
Well, I'll go on record as not agreeing with that statement. Thank you.
On tonight's agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Paul Reitsma, number 6410 Harnish in Parksville. Just to give you a heads up, I was asked last night by the Trill and Creekside residents to attend a meeting, which I attended and sitting at the back. I wish to refer to the minutes of the last council meeting, item number 7, as the two previous gentlemen have done as well, and just state that, and I like council members really to walk in the shoes of the residents over there. Their concern expressed, and then I'll come to the question, is they're very concerned about
the question right away because the motion was defeated. So what's your question?
The question is, why was the south option never presented to the consultant? Let me finish, please.
We've answered that.
Never mentioned to the consultant.
I'm not going there. I'm not wasting my time. We've answered that.
It's never given to the consultant to ascertain. The house prices are affected, the environment is affected, the drainage is a big problem, and there's social input as well.
We've been over all of this.
My question was only why was the consultant never asked to do a cost comparison between the north and the south? That's all.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason was? Why were they not asked?
I'm not going to rehash it. I've spoken to this time and time again. So I'm not going to rehash it. Everybody knows full well what the answers were. Thank you. Is this on tonight's agenda?
It's on the minutes of the last meeting and what you just last spoke about. My name is Trudy Hodges. I live at 113 Maple Crescent in Parksville. And my information is coming out of the newspaper. And they say, and from what I've read, there is no answer to why the south or the north, the cost comparison.
If you had been
I'd
at-
like
if-
to know what it is.
Excuse me, if you had been at the meeting on July the 18th, I gave a long answer.
If I'd known about it, I would have been here. Why didn't the paper know about it? That's what they say. There is no answer. That's what is said in the paper, and that's what I'm reading as a citizen. So I have that question. And it seems like it should be a short, easy answer.
Yes, Councillor
And why won't
Patterson.
anybody
Just a
tell me?
moment. Yes.
Thank you, Worship. If I could just interject for a moment. And unfortunately, the newspaper doesn't get to report everything, but all of our council meetings are recorded, and they are available to be seen by anyone, by the public. And I'm going to
You can
say
watch it on
that,
streaming. It's all there.
that most of that information was presented at the July 18th meeting and that you can review it at your perusal at home at length, go over it.
Where can I get it? Sorry.
So if I could
It's
pass over
available
to-
on the city website.
The
under
sound is very difficult to hear.
It's available on the city website. We archive all of our council meetings are all recorded, and we
Yeah.
archive all of them, and they are available.
And there is a cost comparison between the south side and the north side.
No, there is an explanation by His Worship. There is an explanation by His Worship with respect to that matter. There is no cost comparison. There was never one done.
Oh, yeah, okay, then my next question is, I walk that track.
well,
and
you know what I
I've walked it a
suggest you do?
lot in my life.
You know what I suggest you do?
When I see the two routes, it seems to me, I'm not an engineer, but one side's much easier than the other. And they picked the most difficult side.
Those concerns and questions have all been answered. I'm terribly sorry, but they've all been answered. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to start the council meeting. Thank you.
Well, I'm not happy with your answers either, I guess I might.
No, we're regurgitating things here that have been dealt with before, so we're not going to deal with it tonight.
I don't know. So
Okay.
we'd really like to make
Well, that's democracy. The motion was defeated. End of story. You can't beat a dead horse. Yes, I did. I disagree. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, good evening and welcome to the August 3rd regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item on the agenda this evening is the adoption of the minutes of Council meeting July 18, 2016. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beal. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. The next item is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda? Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any errors or omissions on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. We have 3 delegations this evening. Would somebody please close the door? Thank you. The first presentation we have is no stranger to the City of Parksville. It's Dr. Paul Hasselback, the Medical Health Officer for Island Health. And you're going to talk about the release of the local health area profiles for Parksville. Welcome again, Dr. Hasselback. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of Council. It's a pleasure to be here on such a beautiful sunny evening. Where's my... There we go. I had the opportunity of spending some time with you a couple of months ago when we were focused specifically on the issue of substance use. I did indicate that we do annually release a local health area profile, and if you wanted, I'd be more than willing to come back, and was invited or suggested that I should come back and do so. So I look forward to the next few minutes with you. And I wanted to spend a bit more time about the data, where the data comes from, some of our challenges, some of the progress that's being made to make data better. And I think that in this environment where it becomes so simple to press a few buttons and get a whole bunch of information. For a while, I think that was a bit intriguing. Now we start asking the questions, well, what about that information? Should it be better? Is it good enough? How is it being used? And sometimes when that's being used, we find that all of a sudden it doesn't become available to us any longer. Because some people don't like bad news, others want to hear good news all the time, and I fully appreciate that. I did provide in here a little bit of a list of the predominant sources of information, and it also gives a bit of a time frame of the cycle that we go through. So the most obvious one, since we just completed the 2016 census, is the census information. It becomes available every 5 years. It takes about 2 to 2.5 years after the census before local information becomes more readily available. So sometime in a few years, I'll be back sort of telling you, we've got all this great new data that we collected back on, was it May 1st of this year? And by then I'll be going, well, is that current enough? And how do we use that information? Other data we actually get on an annual basis, and some of that, such as our health statistics, are almost in real time now relative to what information we have. Some of it still only gets cleaned up before it actually gets released. So some of even our health data takes a couple of years. And our vital statistics, which talk about births and deaths, some of that information is very current. Some of that information actually takes several years before death certificates are signed off and all data analysis is completed. Other surveys like the McCurry Adolescent Survey, again, it's a 5-year cycle, and it takes about 3 years before we get the information to come out. School satisfaction and performance measures actually are measured annually and available on an annual basis. So depending on the data source, you'll have more information or lesser information. This is a year of lesser information, so I'm going to try to spend more time on the quality of the data. Most of you are aware that we have a geographic area that gets known as Qualicum, sometimes referred to as Oceanside, but extends from the Nanoose Bay area up to the north end of the regional district of Nanaimo, sometimes referred to as Regional District North. It goes by a variety of terminologies, but because of some historical aspects, it's called Qualicum. And within that, we have 2 local government areas and a substantive rural area for which we get different types of information depending on the source of data. You've seen this graph before. It's a population tree that just shows how different the distribution of the population within the whole of the local health area is, with a substantive peak in the 65 to 69 age range. Basically over the age of 60, it is well known as one of the older areas within not just BC, but also in Canada. That can be a source of pride, but it also provides a challenge relative to what happens at the other end in terms of the growth of families, the acceptability for children, and what does that mean for the sustainability of the community itself, or is it going to be dependent upon retirements? And I know that's an issue that you grapple with. It does have, yeah.
Thank you. I'm just curious, when it said back on that other slide with the reference to island health, is that referring to the numbers of people on Vancouver Island or the island health region, so including Powell River? Is that what that means, that green line?
Yeah, it is the island health region for which there is a large geographic area on the mainland. Doesn't include Powell River, though. There are certain things that are in and certain things that are out, but happy to tell you that geography if you want. It gets some confusion too. And again, I flagged that, relatively speaking, the Qualicum area is healthy comparatively on the islands. It is, in essence, if we're looking at life expectancy here, it's the 3rd longest life expectancy, substantively more than BC, substantively more than Canada. And in part, that's a reflection that those that move to the area tend to come both with perhaps sufficient resources to retire here, but also their health, because they won't move out of their areas if they don't have their health at the time that they move. So some advantage in terms of the healthy migrant effect, and it shows up substantively in the Qualicum area. Now, here's an example of some data that I had showed before, and we stopped showing it, and it was chronic disease prevalence. And for those of you that can recall, anything that's to the left or below 0 tends to be higher rates or higher numbers or less ideal measurement compared to the island as a whole. And this was chronic disease prevalence. And I sort of alluded to at the time that it wasn't age-adjusted. Doesn't surprise me because the number one risk for most of these illnesses is age. So the good news is that we've actually been able to start age-adjusting this. And not surprising, when we do that, what we find is that people in Qualicum actually suffer at a lower rate of illness than what we see on the island, generally in that sort of 6 to 10% improved health status over your colleagues on the rest of the island. So it's nice to be able to give you age-adjusted information in terms of chronic disease prevalence. This will also help when it comes to making some comparison and following some trends over time. You have seen this before, and again, now we've got 5 years of data that we can stack on top of each other. You're able to make the 2015 comparison to previous years. Your live birth rate remains substantively less than what we see in other jurisdictions, about 30% less than on the island. But for the most part, perinatal measures are to the right, greater than 0, and that's a good thing to be seen. Likewise, if we look at our measures of child health, the majority of which are to the right, the one that kind of looks like what's going on there in infant mortality, probably looking at very small numbers, and even 1 or 2 infants in that category, and it's spread over 5 years, can be the wide swing from being substantively better to substantively worse, and now coming back closer to normal in terms of infant mortality rates. We just don't have enough births to make a comparison. It is something that is a good demonstration of why caution in some of the interpretation where we're looking at small numbers of events. Now, one of the anomalies in the Qualicum area when we talk about a relatively well-to-do population, when we begin to look at children specifically, and the proportion of children that are living in poverty, it's probably higher than we might expect. And this is comparatively across the island. Whereas Saanich and Sooke and Greater Victoria would have good life expectancies, and likewise we're looking at relatively low levels of childhood poverty. Here Qualicum all of a sudden shifts over to having a much higher rate of childhood poverty. Now, we do get information in terms of a micro breakdown from the National Health Survey. That's the census that wasn't mandatory and gives us economic information by various different geographies. Our friends at UBC actually collect that information, then share it back to us by different geographies. I just shared them up here because there's 4 for the school district. And we can take a look at the relative distribution of children living under a level of poverty within just the Qualicum area. And as you can see, Parksville actually has a slightly higher than what would be comparable for some of your counterpart communities. The rural area of the Qualicum area actually does have the highest rate, and 35% within any jurisdiction is extremely high for childhood poverty. We can take a look at other measures such as the proportion having families that are led by a lone parent. And again, you'll see, comparatively speaking, there tends to be a movement into larger urban settings, and we actually see that just even within the Qualicum area when families are being led by a single parent. But it is less than what we see for Canada and BC as a whole. So I think I shared this with Council previously, but in doing so we were looking at Qualicum as a whole, but I've been able to pull out the information for Parksville as a community. And what we're looking at here in red is the proportion of children, a proportion of various age groups that are under the low-income median, which is a poverty measure and the standard poverty measure by Stats Canada. And when you look at under 6, what you see is a substantively higher proportion here in Parksville. We would in most jurisdictions see that discrepancy or that comparability between the local jurisdiction and what we see in BC and Canada fairly equal across the various age groups, and it does tend to be less as one gets older. But in the Parksville area, we see this reversion where that children are living in high levels of poverty. Those over 65 are actually at about 50% the rates of poverty that we see for the rest of BC and Canada. And this odd distribution, I'm just going to call it an odd distribution of how wealth is spread within the community, perhaps does lead to some of the challenges that we see with children here. One of which I know I've presented, and school districts not pleased about this, but it was a drop-off in terms of six-year graduation rates. These are students that start grade 8 who actually complete high school within 6 years. And so that's measured based, as long as the student has stayed within the BC system. We saw a bit of a drop-off. I think that some attention to this, and we're starting to see some recovery here as well. Again, just an example of how data can be used to stimulate attention to a particular area. And finally, in closing, wanted to remind Council of some things we talked about last year. What are we looking for in terms of public health initiatives? I know there's progress being made on the drinking water. I think that we've got a meeting scheduled coming up just to review the project. Still encourage you to look at clean air bylaws, and I think that you're going to get some more incentive put in your direction. I know the province has now implemented their regulation as of beginning of this month. The challenges to the outdoor burning restrictions, again, I appreciate that the community has been a leader here and not necessarily gotten the receptivity on the regional district level. The Health Network is moving forward. You now have a director. I encourage you to invite her to come and spend some time with you at some point. And I'm not quite sure where we are in terms of developing a poverty reduction strategy for the community. So with that, Your Worship, members of Council, happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks very much. Could you put up leave that last slide up on the board? That's the interesting one. Any questions from members of Council for Dr. Hasselback? Pretty thorough. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in about a year.
We'll be in touch. I appreciate the implementation of the water program as being number one. It's my number one, too. Okay. Oh, by the way, members who are in the audience, I forgot to mention that Councillor Oates is on holiday, well-deserved, and Councillor Salter is not feeling very well. She's watching us at home, so I promised we'd all wave. So everybody want to wave to Councillor Salter? No? Okay. Thank you. Okay. The next delegation are, I call them the three amigos, and they're here. How many of you here? Are there three of you here tonight, or just two? Just the two amigos are here. Omar Karim, chairman of the MBA Games Organizing Committee. And I've forgotten, you're Mr. Holland? Dustin King. Okay, I've got the other guy. So they're going to tell us about the National MBA Games that are coming to Nanaimo and Parksville VIU in 2017, hosted by the Tainamara Resort. So Karim, Omar, it's all yours. Take it away. Press the button, yeah. Great. You'll find out that Omar is very, very keen.
So first off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of Coast Salish on which we live, learn, and play. And on behalf of the National MBA Games Organizing Committee, I just want to welcome you all and just thank you for giving us the opportunity to be able to speak in front of you today. We're actually part of the Masters of Business Administration program at Vancouver Island University, and we actually have some very exciting information and news to share with the City of Parksville. And so today for our agenda, we're going to give a little bit of overview about the BC MBA Games as well as the National MBA Games. And it's really important for us as an organization, student-led organization as well, to actually kind of give you our story, where we come from, and where we are today, and where we want to be tomorrow. And so we were actually a group of students who started in the MBA program about a year and a half ago. Our director told us about the National MBA Games, and how amazing would it be for us to go to the Nationals, represent Vancouver Island, the city of, we have campuses in Parksville as well as in Nanaimo, and represent, the quality of education, the quality of students at our university. So long story short, we got a team together with 28 students. We raised $42,000 in 2 months, and we went to the National MBA Games. And we'll never forget the moment where our VIU was not announced. And ever since that day, we've been planning on seeing how we could actually go to nationals, conquer nationals, and come back home and make our city and the island proud. So hence we started the MBA Society. We actually hosted and started the first ever BC MBA Games, which was held on the island last year in Nanaimo. And what that actually looks like is we have three components. There's the spirit, case competitions, and then there's the sports components. We had UBC, SFU, UVic, TRU all come to the island to compete. And long story short, Vancouver Island University came in first place. At that event, we actually raised over $10,000 for families living with autism and special needs through the Canucks Autism Network and the Autism Society of British Columbia. Now, heading to nationals this past year, we went there and learning from our first year, we came in actually, the overall result in, we actually had first place was McMaster's, second place was Ryerson, third place was Shoe Lake, fourth place was Vancouver Island University, and fifth place was Laval. So at the end of the day, Vancouver Island University is now best in the West, and we are very excited that we placed overall in case competition, sports, and spirit. We actually won the Spirit Award for our city. We actually raised $32,000 out of $69,000 for the Ronald McDonald National House Charity. And that's $69,000 that was raised by all universities across Canada, and VIU raised $32,000 out of that. We got back, and then there was an open bid to host nationals, and we thought, how can we take this vision to the next level? How amazing would it be if we hosted the National MBA Games? So we submitted our proposal, and all team captains across Canada voted. There was a selection committee, and now VIU has been selected to host the National MBA Games. And this is why we're actually here at the City of Parksville today, to kind of give you a little bit of overview about the BC MBA Games and the National MBA Games, and something that's happening in our cities. Okay, so really quick for the BC MBA Games. Now this year, the BC MBA Games is going to be held in Nanaimo. We had the 5 schools competing, and in the BC MBA Games, it's a smaller scale, about 24 students. We also had last year, the theme was to connect, inspire, and to impact. And this year, our theme for the BC MBA Games is a journey to new heights. And the charity that we're supporting this year is Childhood Cancer Canada. So as you can see in the BC MBA Games, to give you kind of perspective, we have a variety of events that are happening at the same time. Now the BC MBA Games will primarily be held in areas closer to the city of Nanaimo, but we'll give you a little kind of a special thing that we have coming up here.
Hey everyone, Faisal Kamisa here with you. You may or may not know me. I'm a sports anchor at Sportsnet in Toronto, and
What? Okay. Great.
Hey everyone, Faisal Kamisa.
We're thinking you can hear it, but it's just not loud enough.
Here with you. You may or may.
Okay, we're going to move on from this just to make sure we stay within our time. But we actually had a sports broadcaster from Toronto, Faisal Kamisa, who's one of our keynote speakers, who will be actually coming to the island, and he's actually promoting Vancouver Island across Canada for us. So he'll be our keynote speaker. He's an individual who was living with cancer as a child and actually survived cancer, and he's here coming to the island to share his story. Okay, so the big moment we've been waiting for is the National MBA Games, and why we've come here to the city of Parksville. So the National MBA Games will actually be held on January 2nd to 4th, in Parksville. And the theme of the MBA Games is Today for Tomorrow. So last year's theme was to be more, to get involved in the community. And what we looked at is with our team and kind of our leadership strategy is we do things with meaning or we don't do things at all. So what we did is we looked at the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We looked at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, which allowed us to identify our charity of choice. And this year, the National MBA Games, led by VIU, the City of Parksville, the City of Nanaimo, will be supporting the Moose Hide campaign. And that organization is an organization that actually stands up and prevents violence against Indigenous and non-Indigenous women and children. So we're really excited to partner with them this year. So that's our theme for the Nationals. Okay, so again, Nationals, when it's going to be held? January 2nd to 4th. And actually, in the National MBA Games, just imagine 600 to 800 MBA students across Canada from over 20 universities here in Parksville, housed at the Tanamara. So I'll tell you something, in the last 28 years that the MBA Games has happened, this is the first time in Canada in the last 28 years that it's in British Columbia, yet alone the island, yet alone in the city of Parksville. So this is a moment for the city of Parksville to shine, and we want to showcase the beautiful city that we are part of and connected to. Okay, so part of the games components. We have the case components, and we really look at the case components as a vehicle for change. And we're actually going to be having cases, typical events in the past for the MBA Games. They use Richard Ivey cases, pre-published cases. But we really want to showcase the quality of education and the quality of our businesses locally, as well as internationally and nationally. So the case competitions will be written along with VIU MBA students, as well as on local things that we are working on the island. One of the competitions and some of the topics we're looking at is retaining talent on the island, and how can we as a community be able to retain the young leaders that are going to our universities, that are investing their time, their education, and how can we retain these leaders on the island, and how can we do that the best way? So we have four main case components. There's strategy, entrepreneurship, marketing, and finance. Okay, the sports components. This is always a fun component of the MBA Games. We have the three main sports, basketball, volleyball, and dodgeball. And this year we're introducing a new sport, indoor soccer, which will be held at the Arbutus Meadows. Okay, so as we know, the spirit component is the Moose Hide campaign. And this year, actually, for the National Games, we're incorporating this idea of live streaming. And there will be a few events that will be live streamed to showcase not us only nationally, but internationally. So we're really excited about that. Now, the other thing we want to kind of also highlight for the Moose Hide campaign and the idea of reconciliation is VIU is going to be a leader in change and in changer, especially the individuals and groups that are associated with us. And this idea of sharing stories of reconciliation. We're going to actually getting universities to interact with their local First Nations community to share their stories of reconciliation, and for us to really understand that part in the history of that we are all a part of, which we live in. Great. So the schedule for nationals. So as you can see, the schedule is quite, it's quite intensive in how we have it over here. The main day in Parksville in particular is Tuesday. So the Tuesday on January 3rd is a day we would like everyone to remain in Parksville, to enjoy the facilities of Parksville, but we need the City Council support to help us facilitate this. And as you know, there is areas that we require, and that's our ask today, which we'll get to in just a moment. So we'll be showcasing different venues around Vancouver Island, including, Arbutus Meadows, the Nanaimo Conference Center, the Maffeo Sutton Park, the Tanamara Resort and Spa. We're also going to be housing our case competitions at very unique venues, such as Deep Bay Marine Station, Milner Gardens, as well as the VIU facilities. Okay, so I hope the video works now. I'm hoping the sound works. We actually have a little surprise for you to show you exactly what is to come and what we can expect in Parksville.
Welcome to the MBA Games 2016!
It's an honor to welcome you here, and we're really happy to welcome 20 schools from across Canada to the 2016 MBA Games.
We have an awesome weekend set up. It's going to be unique. You're going to love it. And for all the newcomers, we're going to blow you away. You're going to have the time of your life.
MBA Games 2016.
This is in Toronto, so actually we're going to show you the beginning parts. You can see the intensity of the images that are showing up right here. So it's always fun. Tech is always fun, right?
When are you going to get over 600 MBA students from 20 different schools across the country?
So, as you can see, we'll actually have these videos will be posted online, so you can check us on VIU MBA Society. Both the national MBA video as well as the BC MBA Games videos are posted on there. So just, in the moment of technical difficulties, we'll definitely move forward. And our last thing, what we want to talk to the City of Parksville is partnership. And I'll get Dustin, actually, one of our members on the partnership relations team, to hand out a package to each of you. And this kind of goes over kind of what we're looking at. And what we really want to do is kind of build partnerships. And part of us putting on this major competition is there is cost involved for us to especially house members to be here in Parksville on the 3 days, in particular on the January the 3rd day. So if you look in front of you there, that's a reach. We're having over 20 universities across Canada, and our ask today for the City of Parksville is a little bit of support. We actually are planning on the January 3rd to do some fireworks, and we're going to open it up for the community as well. And so when we're looking at different types of initiatives such as this, there are costs involved. We also want to have kind of a bus transport system that will allow students that are here for those 3 days, and actually those aren't weekdays, which is quite interesting, to be able to have access to, meeting and kind of going around downtown Parksville, interacting with local businesses, kind of cultivating the community that we are part of and that the community that we're staying in. So our ask to the City Council, and it's for us, it's not just about the funding, it's about building the partnership, and there are other ways that we can do this as well, is a total amount of $10,000. $5,000 would be in kind, and $5,000 in cash, to be able to be used to reduce our costs with regards to Tanamara, the events that we're doing at Trevor Beach, and any events that we kind of want to help to put on for the community. And that is our presentation today, so thank you so much for having us.
Before I turn the questions over to members of council, you should be aware that Omar and Dustin were at our ECDEV meeting last week, and the Chamber of Commerce was there, the Downtown Business Association was there, the Tourism Association was there, and I believe they've also offered, you've got cards, they've offered to help out. So on that note, anybody have any questions for Omar? This is Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship, but you can't help but be engrossed in it just by the way you presented that. It was very, very good. Thank you. So we will be going into budgeting for next year, and so could I make a motion that this be put on for the 2017 budget to see if we can get the money? And when you talked about in kind, would you go over that again, what it would be?
So that could be a variety of different things. It's helping us. There might be some things, and we would actually maybe sit down with the city manager to look at the costs that we're kind of enduring in the city, and there may be some connections that that the city has that could provide us a reduced cost on that funding or that amount. Okay. That's what we mean by in kind.
Okay, so up to $10,000.
Yeah.
No, I want to.
You've made a motion?
I did.
Okay, and you've seconded it? A discussion on the motion? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Councillor Patterson, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming forward and for your passion, and I love seeing the youth motivated and just enthusiastic about our community and where we live and what we're going to do in the world, and it's just really rewarding to see you here today, so thank you.
Councillor Beale.
Yes, I'd just like to add my thanks to your presentation today, and Building 250 at VIU. So were you there last week?
I probably was there last week, yes.
I spent all day Tuesday and all day Wednesday there, and it was interesting. And yes, there was a very studious and then celebratory group in another wing there, so perhaps that was you folks. Anyway, looking forward to it, and when I saw MBA, I thought, well, I don't think it's basketball. Nowhere was there anything, but of course that prompted me to go online, and so I did look at the history, and yes, I can appreciate it. It's quite a coup to have it shifted not just a little bit west, but quite a ways west, as Ontario and Quebec and perhaps Halifax and Maritimes have tended to have that. So I'm sure all the schools will be really thrilled to be coming to the west for a change. So well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're actually very excited. A few of us have actually, I myself have just convocated from VIU, and a few of us are just staying back to help host the MBA Games and to organize it because we see what it can do for the city. And so we're really excited to have your support.
Councillor Patterson.
I'm sorry, you just said that you've finished your convocation, so are you presently working?
So VIU has provided some support to keep us here, And there's I think there's myself and a few others, and I know our vice chairman who's actually in Germany right now. He actually has prolonged his internship in this program for him to actually be here to help host the games and to organize it.
And what is your field?
My field right now? We finished our MBA, and I did a kind of a specialization in both marketing and finance.
A great place to work in Parksville.
You got a job for him? Well, I want to tell you, Omar, to you and your colleagues, even the colleague, the third amigo that's not here, I've said it before and I'll say it again, our future's in good hands. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
We'll be seeing you again.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, the next presentation we have is from Sandy Herle, the president of the Parksville Downtown Business Association, to request a partnership with the city to create enhanced Christmas season illumination and decorations in the downtown area. It's never too early to start talking about Christmas, is it? You're limping again. What's that? Oh, you have 10 minutes. And Michelle Jones. I neglected to welcome you.
I brought Michelle along. Pam's on holidays, and Terry wasn't able to make it from the Chamber of Commerce. So thank you so much for this opportunity. As mentioned, my name is Sandy Herle. I am president of the Parksville Downtown Business Association. Our mandate is to promote and enhance the Parksville Downtown. We work with other organizations such as the Chamber of Commerce and Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism to enhance our community, working towards our ultimate goal of making Parksville Downtown attractive and a business center that we're all very proud to be part of. One of our tasks has been our Christmas project, which is what we're here for today. Over the past few years, we have, as an organization, targeted building the spirit of Christmas. There's no question that our residents like and appreciate this. Our community also wants it. We certainly have read in this past winter, we read letters to the editor expressing a desire for more Christmas lighting than is currently being done. This is not to say that many of the businesses participate and decorate their own businesses, and we're proud of what they do. Each year there are windows lit up, outside twinkles, and indoor displays, but of course we always want more. The Parksville Downtown Association has been building on the Christmas spirit. From 2010 to 2015, we've spent a total of $67,900 on Christmas as a specific line item. Prior to this, unfortunately, Christmas dollars were not separated in our budget. Included in this now identified budget are 5 Christmas trees that we have purchased over the past few years, tall, fabulous trees I'm sure many of you have seen that sit strategically throughout our downtown. They're lit up and they proclaim the season, defining our area and definitely boosting our Christmas appearance. This year, in 2016, we will add a 6th tree, and we appreciate the City Works Yard as they will accept the delivery of this new tree in the next few months. And we're fortunate to have Dennis Holmes of Pro West on side with us. He installs all of those beautiful trees and stores them when our season is over. A couple of years ago, with the assistance of Home Hardware, we planted a tree at the end of Craig Street, many of you have seen. There's power at the base, and we proudly string this tree with colored lights. I don't even think we needed a ladder the first year that tree was planted, but now, of course, we do. It's grown really well. There's no doubt that this will become a significant location of one of our lit-up trees in future years. In addition, we'll be commencing our 3rd season of our infamous North Polapalooza, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This, with the fabulous assistance of United Floors and their empty carpet poles, involve participating businesses decorating a great Christmas pole for their business. Once we've done with the transformation of our poles, we list the participating businesses on our site and in the newspaper, and then various clients enter a draw where they've seen all the poles. And this past year, we had our participating businesses donate over $2,000 worth of prizes that went into a gift basket that we called Gotta Love Downtown. And we had a very proud recipient winner for that. And last year, for the first time, we had an official light-up of the sequoia tree down at the clock at the base of Morison. And Mayor Lefebvre was there doing a fabulous job of flicking that switch for us. This year, we hope to have even more lights and some colored lights on that beautiful tree as well. Our Christmas committee worked on this event, and we were so fortunate to have the Craig Bay choristers perform for us. We sincerely hope they will participate again this year. There was popcorn, little goodie bags, and if I can say so, a great turnout for our first time. This year, 2016, we have this event scheduled for November 25th, and we hope that you can all make it. We can certainly build on this event, and that brings me to my reason for tonight's appearance. While we may not be a community with a large established Christmas celebration, we are truly committed to changing that. We are Parksville, a small city with citizens who want us to get on board. A business community has shown through their financial contributions and their volunteer hours that they care and they want to make a difference. And they do make a difference. We can all be part of this step by step. There is no question that we can do this. We, as the Parksville Downtown Business Association, the City of Parksville, and the Parksville and District Chamber of Commerce, we can all work together to continue with this seasonal plan, to build on year after year. As the Parksville Downtown Business Association, we know that this could be done over time in a phased-in approach, each year building on the last, and we recognize that this is truly a practical approach to take. Step one for us was the North Polapalooza. Step two was the light up of the sequoia tree and the event, and this will certainly build and become an ongoing signature event with your support. And step three, our next step, would be to light up the trees on the Alberni Highway. We have confirmed with city staff that we do have receptacles and power in that section of town at the base of these trees from the fire hall down. We have received a quote on what it would cost. There are approximately 40 trees in that section of town, and we're estimating about 3 strands per tree. We've received a quote for the purchase of the necessary lights to be approximately from $1,300 to $1,800, depending on the number of lights that we want per tree. And we recognize that there will be additional costs of installation and the takedown and the storage. And we did look at solar, the price of solar lights, and that was recommended that we do not take that approach. We're requesting that the city participate in this step 3 by contributing to the purchase of these lights, as well as providing staff to install, remove, and store the lights from year to year. We're asking the city to partner with us and other like-minded organizations to create a spirit of Christmas, a downtown with distinction, a partnership to add some pizzazz to our downtown business area. The PDBA is fortunate to be one of only 2 cities in British Columbia to have a memorandum of understanding between us and the City of Parksville. The memorandum of understanding that we have with the city confirms that the city will support the PDBA in hosting downtown community events and beautification projects that the PDBA may plan, including consideration of funding requests. And this is one such beautification project. As I mentioned earlier, the Parksville Downtown Business Association has contributed to our seasonal program with planned events and the building of an inventory of our lit Christmas trees. We definitely have invested our dollars. Our businesses will continue with their individual participation and decorations to promote and enhance their contributions and commitment to this community. We now respectfully are asking the city to partner with us and contribute to the lighting up of our downtown, commencing with the lighting up of the trees lining the Alberni Highway within our downtown core. While we recognize there are many demands of the city, as a business community and as residents, the city's participation in this seasonal project will create a sense of pride, give us a larger value, a larger picture that we can all appreciate, and one that we can certainly all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks again to the PDBA for all the good work. You're right, last November was quite an event. There were a lot of people. It was a good night. I hung around with a number of people that were the people kept coming. It got more and more popular. Okay, members of council, who has a question? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have one question. So you talked about staff helping with putting up and taking down, and then you've asked for support with the amount of dollars. So is the support taking the lights up and down separate from the amount of dollars, or is that included?
No, that's separate. That would be a staff costing that would have to be, we'd have to figure that out. We priced out the lights.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so are you looking for a partnership with the city and yourself at like 50%?
We would, right now that we are looking for what the city would feel would be fair to contribute, and so we're not necessarily asking for the total amount. We're asking the city to show with us that this is a building proposition, that we can't do it overnight, and it's going to take some time to do it, and with the city showing that they would be also wanting to enjoy the lights, the lighting up. We can certainly put some money into our budget. As far as putting the lights up and taking them down, that is in my understanding, a 100% staff task that we volunteers would not be able to do.
Okay, and so I'd just like to ask a question through you, Your Worship, to the CAO. How much money do we have in our contingency fund?
Currently have $6,500.
Could I make a motion? I would like to make a motion that we, the city, through the contingency fund, provide the PDBA for the Christmas tree lights up to $800.
Could I make a friendly amendment, and a friendly amendment and bump that up to $1,000? Oh, we haven't. No, wait a minute. We haven't approved the motion. Sorry.
Okay, so we have a friendly amendment.
Discussion. Thank you, Your Worship. Questions towards our CAO, and that because so far we've discussed that we have staff in kind to put up the lights. We haven't discussed hydro type costs for lighting, which the city would incur as well. So I'm not sure if we have any past history, because it's been so very, 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 very long. But I'm assuming that that it's going to cost considerably more. So if you could interject
I
for me.
certainly don't have the hydro costs, but Mr. Figuera may be able to provide a bit of an estimate.
If I may, Your Worship, all I'm aware of at the moment is that there are extra hydro costs. We identify how many lights we're putting up, and there's a calculation with the wattage. So we are charged for that. I really couldn't say what that figure was in the past.
Councillor Patterson, I have a comment to make in a moment. Go ahead.
I have two follow-ups. So my question would be, with the lights, can they be on a timer type system so that they're lit up? Doesn't matter if it's dark or if it's light, that like at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock that lights are going on and at 2 o'clock they're going off? Do you know if that's even possible? I know that I brought some lighting catalogs and everything to Pam, and some decorations and things from our trip to FCM in Toronto, but so I'm not sure.
My understanding is the lights that we have at the base of Craig Street go with the street lights. It's the timing for that. Is that not correct?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. And the lights that we are purchasing or have priced out, of course, are economical LED lights, so that's going to be. I guess the question would be, the lights were lit up when the trees were first planted, or on there, so it would be, and that was city. So whatever the city had at that time, would be something that could certainly be looked into. And as I said, I appreciate the demands that are made of the city, but this is also being part of enhancing our community and, not, and having us be proud of it, not seeing letters to the editor that are bemoaning the lack of, and understanding that this is a build. This is not we're not asking for, this is a build in conjunction with the business, many of the businesses that are already paying Hydro to do this.
Can I just have one?
You certainly can.
And I'm not sure if it's an amendment or anything to the motion, but towards our CAO, when this motion goes forward and after the Christmas type season, if we can get a cost of how much dollar-wise it was for staff takedown and put up, and the hydro cost involved for the Christmas light-up.
Yes, we can certainly do that, Your Worship. So is it the intent that in addition to purchasing the lights, we are also providing all of the staff support required? Is that the intention?
I have a question. Why did staff tell you not to use solar lights? The mayor is a big solar fan, so I
know that, and I'll be honest with you, sir. With your background in mind, we certainly checked into it. It just was not a practical direction to go. Because of the lights at that time of the year, or the lighting of the sun, the lack of sun, or whatever? I think we're part of the sky issues that we are dealing with. Oh. I'll have to talk to the CAO and the Director of Engineering about solar someday anyway. Yes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really appreciate you bringing this forward. I do think that having some light and having some color at the darkest time of the year, and sometimes the wettest time of the year as well, is really welcome. I also really am pleased to hear that the plan is to change the lights on the tree that's lit up so that we'll have some color there and not the pale phantom lights that we had this past year. But no, I think it's a wonderful start, and hopefully we can get that sparkle going, and those lights will be up when the MBA games are here.
You know, I had a call from a gentleman right after Christmas, early this year, and he was very unhappy about the fact that we don't have more lights. And he volunteered to help out and do whatever he could. So if he's watching or if he's in the audience, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name and I can't find your old phone number. But we had a number of discussions about it, and we exchanged a few emails. So I gather that with your presentation here tonight, we've got the press here, we're on live streaming. Anybody that wants to help out or wants to participate, this is the message that the gentleman left me. Feel free to do so, because you're building something here. We started. You started last year, and it's going on again this year. So we're building something, and the journey of 1,000 steps begins by the first step. We're going into the second step. So if anybody out there wants to participate or work with PDBA or with the city, and let us know, because there's always room for more money and more hands to help out. And I know that this gentleman was quite crestfallen that we hadn't done more in terms of Christmas lights. And I had to use the old speech that I always use, is that we don't have a bottomless pit of money, and nor does the PDBA. So we're starting, and we're hoping to build it up as much as we can. The other, just a closing remark on our behalf and yours as well, is that there always needs to be someone at the lead,
someone who's going to organize, and someone who's going to make it happen. And the partnership that we have with the city, we appreciate very much. And we have worked together on many things, and this is another one that we will work on together. And we will both, as our organization and as the city of Parksville, we will both benefit from it and be, you know, you're heading home from work, you'll be proud of looking at those lights and proud of our little city.
And I would imagine that, or you talked about the Chamber of Commerce, I would imagine the Chamber of Commerce is going to get involved also, I would think.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Okay. So, you know, it's never too early. Anybody that's watching or anybody that's listening or anybody that, if we get a write-up on this, anybody that thinks it's too early to talk about Christmas lighting, it's not. It can start tomorrow or it can start next week.
Our Christmas committee has been meeting since May.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks once again. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Before I give you the before I ask for a mover and a seconder on the notice on title for units at Oceanview Gardens, I'm sorry. Oh, I've forgotten all about the motion. So, the motion is only for purchasing of the lights. The city pays for all of the rest, right? That's your intent? Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so I will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. We're on our way. Sorry about that. All right, we're on reports now. And before I ask Mrs. Kaler to give us the background on this issue and a mover and a seconder, I want to know if Inez and Don Loudon are in the audience. Billy Margaret Holdershaw? Or Shirley Ann Hendrickson? Okay. So just before I ask for a mover and a seconder, only those named individuals who provided notice in writing are eligible to speak to council on this matter. Now, what you should know is that the resolution has been amended. I don't know if you have a copy, but the resolution has been amended. Maybe, Ms. Kaler, you could tell us. It's an amendment to postpone any action until that should a complete building permit application suitable for the purpose of permit issuance not be received within 30 days, that council direct a corporate officer to file notice on land title for units 345 and 360C Morison. So I don't know if you're aware of that. It's a last minute amendment that was made just before we met this evening. So do I ask someone to come, do I ask them to want to come and speak first? Okay. So if you want to come and speak, please be advised that this is being delayed for another 30 days. So it's up to you. You're more than welcome to speak. Would you come up to the microphone and turn it on, please? So you're Mrs. Loudon? Okay. Make yourself at home. Turn the microphone on. Would you mind putting down that computer thing? It's in my vision. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. First, we want to be clear that we're not against getting the permits. We've gotten a permit to remove decommissioned fireplace from our condo. The issue here is that we are asked to sign a permit taking sole responsibility for work that has already been done. We have no knowledge of how it's been done. We don't know how it was inspected. And I guess the issue keeps going around balconies, but there's another issue that's really, really important, is that when this remediation was done, they also went through the envelope and they did some repairs, and I'm not sure what they did, and then they had to restucco it. Now that was done without permits, and that was done without a structural engineer overseeing it. So we have, excuse me, that concern as well, right? I'm losing my voice, sorry. With the permit, we were given 3 different documents by Alliance Strata Property Services that I had to request. And they wanted us to sign it. So the first one was Schedule A, which was confirmation of commitment, that we retained the architect, which we had no knowledge of.
The Schedule B was the assurance of professional design, which was supposed to be submitted prior to construction. Obviously it was. Both of those are dated this year in 2016. And then there was the drawings that were attached, were just the typical balcony drawings pertaining to nothing, no individual one. So I guess this goes back to 2011 at the AGM when Alliance made it very clear that the two buildings needed to be remediated. And they said they were going to use an envelope assessment report, which was done by Condrey Engineering. They were going to use that as a guideline. They were going to have Richard from Praxis Engineering. They kept referring to them as an engineer, when in reality they're an architect. He was going to oversee everything and sign off on it. And he did say every step would be taken to apply sound remediation practices. So none of that was done. They didn't hire an engineer, they hired an architect. They didn't go by the Condrey report because they didn't get the permits. And then when you go back from 2011 to 2015, there has been $310,000 that has been delegated to the remediation. This is by special assessments and by taking money out of the contingency reserve fund. And that's only half the balconies. And that doesn't even go into what they've done to the structure. So as owners, we relied on Alliance, and we relied on our strata council at that time to follow through what was said at the AGM meetings. We don't live here, so we rely a lot on the minutes, right? And what they said was totally wrong. They did not do any of that. So I guess as an owner, we're given the permit to sign with 3 documents and take sole responsibility, which I don't think we can. I mean, we don't know what they did, especially when you go through the envelope. That's the frightening part of it. So the question is, why should we have the responsibility and the burden of a note put on our title when I think the responsibility goes back to Alliance and the strata at that time? Obviously, this has to be done, and I don't have any problem with it. I don't have a problem paying for permits. What I have a problem with is we do not know what's been done in the structure. And I mean, I have documentation, I have pictures. When they go into the structure, into the envelope, and your balconies are attached to that, and there was no structural engineer involved, and just the architect who approved the drawings, I guess, that's a big responsibility to put on owners. So I don't know what the answer is other than perhaps having to reopen, take a look at what they did, ask for another permit. I don't know. I guess that's what we're here for. But just to let you know that we don't have a problem with this. We're not arguing it. We just have a problem that's been done, and we don't follow up on it.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so on that note, nobody else is here to speak to it, I gather. I'm looking for somebody else. No? All right. So I need a mover and a seconder for the amended resolutions that you have, Council. So do I have a mover and a seconder for the resolutions? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Mrs. Kaler, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding this notice on title for units Oceanview Gardens apartment complex 345 and 363 Morison Avenue?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Section 57 of the Community Charter provides local governments with a tool to essentially notify future landowners or property owners where works have been undertaken without the benefit of a permit. And so in this particular case, as the property owner mentioned, significant amendments were made to the buildings at the 2 addresses on Morison, 345 and 363, and no building permit was applied for or obtained from the city at that time. And so a building permit was submitted on Friday, and so in recognition of that, I would say, good faith gesture on the part of Alliance. They are attempting to apply for the permit now retroactively, and we were hoping that Council would be supportive of a 30-day extension, whereby if they have not submitted an application that is suitable for building permit issuance, we would then proceed with registering the notice on the title. When a permit is obtained and issued, the landowners can apply to remove that from their certificate of title, but in the interim, it essentially provides notice to future purchasers that some works have been undertaken without the benefit of the normal inspections. The Director of Community Planning has some more details on the actual permitting aspect, so he can certainly dive in if that's something that Council needs to hear, but we are hoping that we will get compliance and will not need to register, but if that doesn't happen, we're hoping Council would support that happening in 30 days' time.
Mr. Russell, do you wish to add anything?
If I may, Your Worship, the only thing I would add is that originally individual permits were required for the units. However, our solicitors had an opportunity to review the strata's bylaws, and so at this point in time, it is acceptable for the city to receive one building permit application for the work, and that was the application that was received on Friday.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Kaler and Mr. Russell? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. Directed to Mr. Russell. Based on the speakers prior, do you foresee with the building permit application that they will address some of the concerns that I've heard tonight of the work that's already been done?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson, the inspection service inspects it to ensure it's in compliance with the BC Building Code, but it is also a professional reliance model, so the architect of record takes on a portion of that responsibility in the process by putting their stamp and seal on it.
Follow up. And I'm not quite sure how to word this exactly, but say that there is perhaps an issue of the work that has been done, and that legally I'm assuming that the owners will look after that in regards with their strata and things like that, but the building permit would not proceed until work has been corrected?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson, there's a couple steps in the building permit process, but the initial permit is really authorization to proceed with the work, and until the work is demonstrated to meet the BC Building Code, the city would not be in a position to issue final on that permit, so it's kind of a couple-step process.
Any further questions from members of Council? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. The next report is, I'm going to invite individuals to speak. This is on the consideration of issuances of a development variance permits to vary the maximum residential fence and retaining wall height requirements 503, 497, 491, 485, 479, 473, and 467 Richfield Drive. Any individuals want to speak to this in the audience? No? Okay, I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Beale, seconded by Councillor Powell. Mr. Russell, please give us the background on the issue.
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship. So we have 7 applications for council consideration this evening. They're all for fence variances to relax the maximum height to allow for up to a 2-meter fence, a 1.8 meter fence on top of a 1 meter retaining wall to allow for a total height of 2.8 meters versus the standard height of 2 meters. The recommendation is as per the agenda, and at this time we have received no written correspondence.
Any questions? Any further questions? I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the recommendations? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, once again, I'm going to ask if anybody in the audience wants to speak to the consideration of a development variance permit and associated development permit application for 651 Sanderson Road. Anybody here to speak to that from the audience? Okay. So I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Powell. Mr. Russell, once again, would you please give us the background on this issue,
If Mayor Worship, the application before council consideration for the variance is to legalize a set of existing stairs and an existing deck. The relaxation is to the watercourse setback and the top of bank. In addition, the development permit is intended to facilitate a future building envelope and other associated landscaping. And the recommendation is as per the report. At this time, we've received no written correspondence.
Any questions for Mr. Russell from council? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the recommendations? Opposed? Thank you. That is also carried. Okay, the next item is the consideration of a development permit for a resort accommodation development on Lot A, District Lots 123 and 125 in the News District Plan, VIP 80938, accept part and plan of VIS 6005, phases 1 to 4, and in Common Property Strata Plan, VIS 6005, 1175 Resort Drive. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Mr. Russell, if you would, please.
If for Mayor Worship, before Council's consideration this evening is a development permit to facilitate 32 duplex buildings, which will result in 64 tourist accommodation rental buildings. If it would be helpful to Council, I can certainly show some slides of the site and some of the plans.
I think you should, yeah,
okay.
Please.
Great. For whatever reason, it's not readable, I'm afraid, so I'm just going to have to describe it. So we have a site. There are pictures in the report. So this is a developed site, or partially developed site. About approximately half the site is developed. There's been a change in format over what was previously proposed in the prior development permits. It was more of an apartment-style development. In reviewing the application, it appears to staff that there's a couple guidelines that do not appear to be fully satisfied. Staff, however, recognize that it's ultimately council who measures whether or not those guidelines have been satisfied. From a staff perspective, we're on no delusions that this is a pristine site. It has been significantly modified over the years. The area in particular at this point is pretty devoid of vegetation. That being said, the guidelines speak to the fact that unless there's a compelling reason, and to staff there didn't appear to be, that development should be 15 meters back from the top of the bank. Council may feel so compelled in the matter, but as I said, staff's review of it appeared to us that there was other design alternatives that could have been considered. Of a lesser matter, lesser significant matter, is the application was reviewed by the advisory design panel. The advisory design panel did note that it would they had a preference to see more stone materials on building A to help tie it in with building B. There's also stonework on the existing buildings on the site. There are guidelines that do point to the fact of enhancing natural wood and stone materials, and it's really at council's discretion whether or not you feel that that guideline has been satisfied. Staff recommendation is to deny the permit to seek that those two items be addressed, but in recognition that council is the ultimate decision maker on whether these guidelines have been satisfied, we have provided the alternative guidelines as well as the permit for council consideration. If I may, Your Worship, I believe the proponents are in the audience, so if council did wish to open the floor to questions from them, certainly you can. You also could defer a decision and ask for additional information.
Council, I'd be willing to do that if you have any questions for who's representing this project in the audience. Okay, so the two gentlemen sitting in the front row, if you have any questions. First of all, are there any questions for Mr. Russell? Any questions from the gentleman in the audience? Pardon me? If you want them to come up to the, you want to come up to the microphone, put that laptop top down, please. Just before somebody has any questions for these gentlemen, I particularly don't, but I was concerned in the report that the recommendations of the advisory design panel would result in expenditures of some $60,000. I'll talk to you, Mr. Russell. So some $60,000 for the additional, lack of a better word, rock work.
If Mayor Worship, that's what the proponent has indicated.
Yeah, and of course this is a tourism issue, and the tourism, we all know what tourism means to our community. So, on that note, anybody got any questions for Mr. Russell or for the gentleman? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. I sit as the liaison for the advisory design panel and has already seen a presentation by the proponents. And in respect to the rock work that was suggested, the plan and everything was predominantly approved. We really did like the amount of landscaping and the trees and everything that would be kept. So now I'm seeing that there's quite a bit of change in that, or some changes in that. So without being like going through a ton of paperwork to say what those things are, maybe you could speak to the changes that staff are suggesting to deny the application. Can I, sorry, if I'll go through Mr. Russell, through your worship.
If Mayor Worship, just one point of clarification, there were no changes, so the plans that you saw at the advisory design panel are the plans on the agenda. Are the same plans? The recommendation of the advisory design panel is shown in the report, and that was to revisit the stonework on the buildings. But yes. There have been no changes from what you saw at the meeting.
What was your reaction to the recommendations of the advisory design panel, especially you came up with a figure of $60,000? Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. I think $60,000 was a general off-the-cuff estimate of the stonework. In our opinion, it may be as high as $80,000. But I think the thing that is very important to realize is the buildings that the Advisory Council is suggesting that we modify the stonework on are adjacent to and in very close proximity to 3 existing buildings that are already on the site. Without having the benefit of visiting the site, it's very hard to visualize how those new buildings will integrate with the existing buildings. We are of the opinion that the stonework that we are suggesting for the Building A design is consistent and complementary to the buildings that they are immediately adjacent to. So in our opinion, the addition of the stone wouldn't visually enhance that integration of the new with the existing buildings.
Okay. Councillor Patterson.
direct, through your worship, to Mr. Russell. Is that predominant? I'm of no opinion of rock or whatever. My more concern was the 15, the setback and that. So are those the two issues that we are looking at, just putting it in layman's terms, that this application would be denied?
If our worship, those are the two grounds that staff has suggested are under council consideration for denial. They don't have to be linked. Council can feel that one is satisfactory but not the other. Council may have other guidelines that you feel have not been satisfied. As I said, that's staff's review of the application.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I am very concerned about the setback. It calls for 15. There's room for those to be back further. And so for that reason, I wouldn't support this. And is that written in stone for you? Can you move that back to 15?
I think I'll defer to Bob to speak to the setback.
Your Worship, councillors, staff. We have an existing building already on the bluff face that's a 4-unit building, which is significantly closer to the bluff edge than what we're proposing. On that basis, we're in between what the 15-meter recommendation is and what that building provides in terms of its proximity to the slope. Pulling it back affects the ability to get parking related to those units in proximity to those units, and is more difficult because of that.
Follow-up, Councillor Powell?
I understand, and I know that building is down there. I was out there recently when I stayed there. But the question I have is, since that time, we have changed the setback. And we didn't say halfway, we said 15 meters.
Yes.
And so that's what I would be requesting, 15 meters, not halfway.
Yeah. I think it's also written in that guideline that with respect to having professional expertise address any issues in terms of what those concerns might be related to structural and geotechnical issues, we have provided information from our geotechnical engineer that sees no issues with respect to our siting.
So in other words, what I hear you saying is if you build there, you take full responsibility.
Precisely. We have already done due diligence with respect to that.
Okay. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Worship. I did find it interesting reading the geotechnical report. I also followed up with questions of our planner and reread this a number of times. I still come back to the guideline indicating that the preferred setback is 15 meters from the top of the bank, and it is a fairly steep bank, so I would certainly want to support that, given that it does seem that there might be room for an alternative there if those the 2 duplexes are absolutely essential in order for you to meet whatever target you're aiming for. It seems to me that there could be room on this site, whether it be for triplex, triplex, I'm not sure how they're pronounced, or some alternative if it's essential, or to simply not build those 2 buildings that infringe within that area of the setback. So it just seems to me that I wouldn't want to support that for that reason. I would want to see that setback guideline respected, if at all possible. It's not like there's no room on the land to do certainly the majority of what you're doing. Also, to refer to the advisory panel, when you spoke earlier about the buildings A, there's buildings A and buildings B, and building A fitting in with what's already there, I understood that the concern was having some linkage and continuity between buildings A and buildings B, which do have some stonework, the stone facade, and given that they have a very different roof line and some other things, that was where some of the concern is. Have you done some other work with the exterior so that the shift from buildings A fit in with building B?
There are 3 duplex units related to the building A type and 29 of the B type. We have incorporated stone piers similar to what we have on the already existing buildings in the building A type, and we have roof profiles that are related to the existing buildings in terms of slope, etc. And there's a demarcation beyond that precinct where we have the balance of the 29 B-type units, which are treated in a more contemporary way. So.
I'm curious then, thinking about that and understanding that in the resort area, there is a preference again to have stone and wood present. Not having the stone with some buildings, will that be present in other ways, let's say in landscaping or others, to again give that natural sort of effect?
We will have some stone on the Type A buildings. We won't have the extent of stone and in the manner that the stone is installed on the contemporary buildings. On the existing buildings, the stone is basically pier work related to columns, etc., external to the building, and we're treating the A-type buildings similarly. The building B units have a stone veneer in a plane related to a particular wall that's associated with the deck area, etc., to give that some different context. So.
One more, then I've got to move on. I can come back to you, but I've got to move on.
I'm just curious, a question here perhaps for yourself or for Mr. Russell or Mrs. Colmus. If one has an objection to one part but not necessarily the other, are the different areas, how do we separate those out?
That would have to, that depends on what kind of a motion you want to make. Councillor Patterson.
Councillor Beale has suggested my question. The 2 buildings which I have on page 136 of my agenda, 21 and 22, those are the 2 buildings. I'm directing that to Mr. Russell. That on one of my in my information package that they're suggesting that it should be at 37 meters setback, not the 15 on page 134. But I guess my question will go to our CAO. Can we separate out part of the development permit application in regards to the setback properties and remove the rock?
Yes,
the rock suggestions from the advisory design panel? Okay. So.
But just before I want to make a few comments. I'm looking at this situation in a very large context, in the context of tourism, as I said earlier. I did have a discussion with Mr. Russell, and I did visit the site. First thing I want to say is I'm not an architect, but when I visited the site and I looked what was planned, there's an awful lot of, what do you call them, what's the word I'm looking for? They're on the building now. The shakes. The shakes all over the buildings there now. I looked around. I drove around. So I don't have a problem with that. When it came to the setback, and again, going back to the importance of tourism and going back to the whole thing of economics and employment and all of that sort of thing, and it's a fairly large project. Mr. Russell made it very clear to me that this is not shall. This is something that should be done. There's a difference between should and shall. So personally, I don't do this very often. As a matter of fact, this is probably the first time in a long time, but I don't agree that we deny the development permit for both cases. Again, coming back to the overall issue of tourism, coming back to the overall issue of the economic ripple effect and all of that sort of benefit that it would be for the city of Parksville. If staff had said to me, "Thou shall," then that's a whole different story. But I've been assured that this is a case where, I think Mr. Russell mentioned it earlier, any of us can be in a position to not agree with the fact that the permits be denied. So those are my comments. I won't support I won't support denying probably anything in this case. I think I'd like to see the project go forward. So that's my 2 cents worth. Councillor, it's Councillor Powell, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Patterson.
And so I would like to go back to the comment the mayor made earlier about liability. Now, if something were to happen, the bank broke down, who would be liable for that? The city, or would it be the property owner? Just a nice, easy question.
With our Mayor Worship, through to Councillor Powell. So we do have a geotechnical report that does say that the proposed location is safe for the intended use. As the city has its fingers in the approval process, it would ultimately be potentially found to be somewhat liable should a house fall into the ocean, etc. So that comes with being involved in the permitting process, whether a building permit or other permitting applications.
So when we change the setback to 15 meters, talk about what that encompasses, the reasoning behind it.
If your Mayor Worship, through to Councillor Powell, the reason is kind of twofold. One is a geotechnical aspect. The other is impact on the marine foreshore. So the closer you have buildings and development to the marine foreshore creates impacts on that environment, whether it be light spillage, increasing activities, all those aspects. So that's the rationale for the guideline. And as I mentioned, the guideline should. If there's a valid reason, you can. But as I said, in staff's review to us, at least, there did not appear to be that.
And so if you've got the bluff, would it still have the same environmental impact on the foreshore? Would it still be the same?
Your Worship, sorry, I'm tripping on my tongue. If it was a flat piece of property and it was within 15 meters of the ocean, it would conceivably have a greater environmental impact than if it's 15 meters from the top of the bank.
It wouldn't have the same amount of impact on the foreshore from the bluff if it was 8.6 meters back.
In my opinion, the further back it is, the less potential it has to have impact on the natural environment, and the more potential there is to restore the natural environment.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. The existing building that's on the bluff, how far back is it?
I'm not exactly sure, but it's probably 2 or 3 meters from the edge in terms of the construction of the building at the corner.
My question was, the existing building that is there,
yes.
How many meters is it away from the bluff edge?
At the corner of the building that's closest to the bluff, it's probably 2 to 3 meters.
Okay. And so the proposed building 21 and 22, and that they're parallel or back?
They're back further than that.
Back further than that.
8.3 meters.
3 meters.
And one thing to note, too, is I believe that the walkway that is now constructed down the bluff was part of the original DP that the municipality itself had insisted on. And so the question is, with respect to maintaining the bluff at that time, it was potentially more of an issue in hindsight. So.
It's going to sound like somewhat of a leading question, but I have to ask it. If the setback is maintained at 15 meters, what's the impact on the project?
The impact is it may be impossible to get the parking that we need related to those units, because if we pull the buildings back, we take away areas that we're using for those cars.
Any further questions from staff or from the two gentlemen? And I'm sorry, I forget your name. I don't know your name. So I forget your name. Any further questions? Oh, Mr. Powell.
And so you're talking about the parking. There is an existing parking lot there, a small one. And are the two new?
There is some existing parking, or an area that was used for parking in the area where those units are proposed, because there was a building that we pulled away from the bluff, which was on the bluff edge, when it has become the amenities building for the pool. So we in fact removed an existing building that was on the bluff edge in the previous year with respect to construction of the pool.
And so will that parking lot stay there?
Well, it's not a parking lot. It's itself. It's just essentially dirt that cars had access to.
Okay.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to our gentleman here, I heard you mention that, pushing it back, leaving it as it is, pushing it back, you would impact parking. Is it also possible to consider some other alternative? You presently have some three-story buildings, do you not, on site? So doing something else with some of the buildings closer to, I'm not going to micromanage this, but it seems that there could be another alternative that would allow for those 4 units to be incorporated into something else that is not completely different from something that you already do have on site.
Sure. One of the things that we looked at when we reapproached this project, because we have to be mindful that this project has been started now 3 times and failed 3 times, is we were of the opinion that it would be foolish for us to try and do what has failed 3 times in a row. And a part of our application for a completely different design on the property was to find something that's financially viable and feasible to build there, that's also consistent with the OCP and the intended use. One of the things that we found in the three previous developers who failed, one of the biggest handicaps they had was cost of construction, and particularly cost of construction of unsaleable square footage. And by that I mean common walkways, elevators, underground parking, etc. So we tried our best to do what I think is a complete redesign and reapproach to this project, and eliminating those financial Achilles heels that crippled our predecessors. In terms of concealed parking or higher density or multi-story buildings, we feel that that was a large contributing factor to the failure of our predecessors. I have one other question, and Blaine, maybe you can help me out here. Just with respect to the 15-meter setback, it's my understanding that this is not a City of Parksville bylaw or guideline. This is a general coastal region guideline that speaks to every conceivable construction scenario within a reasonable distance of a shoreline for the island. Am I correct in my understanding?
If I'm Your Worship, you're incorrect. It's actually a development permit guideline in a City of Parksville bylaw in the official community.
Okay, thank you.
Last time. So I've heard enough, and I am willing to support this because it is, environmentally, it won't impact it as much as it would if it was right on the shoreline. I understand that it's economics as well. I don't think you should be coming to council with a I'll support it because I think the questions I asked were answered to satisfy. So I will support it.
Patterson.
So at this time, with the recommendations that are in our package, would we have to defeat this recommendation and then ask for a new recommendation?
Mr. Russell is saying yes.
And if I may, Your Worship, an alternative recommendation is attached to the staff report as well, and it's one of the schedules. I think it's Schedule A.
1.5. It is.
If I may, Your Worship, it is on page 107 of the agenda package.
Can you put your...
The second one is the council issue the development permit to Sunrise Resort Parksville Limited with all the numbers that I won't bother going over to facilitate 32 duplex buildings containing 64 tourist rental units and a two-story configuration in addition to signage and landscaping as the development permit attached to this report. That as a term of development permit, landscaping security in the amount of $124,616 be submitted to the city prior to the commencement of the land alteration or construction or building permit issuance for the purposes of assuring the completion and successful establishment of on-site landscaping. So, Mrs. Gomez.
Your Worship, I would like to suggest that if council is in, if everyone is in agreement, that the mover and seconder withdraw the original motion and that the alternate motion be moved, seconded, and voted on. But all of council would have to be in agreement to do that.
Is there a mover and a seconder for that, to withdraw the original motion? You're moving it?
No, you don't need to move it. The mover, Councillor Beale, and the seconder, Councillor Patterson, must agree to withdraw the motion. And
understand. So, do you agree?
It's me.
Oh, it's Councillor Beale. Okay, so Councillor Beale and Councillor Patterson?
I will say that listening to everything that, yes, I will with some reluctance because I just want to say this, that the fact that there is an existing building that once upon a time would have been considered close enough for environmental reasons weren't considered at that time should not necessarily mean that then, well, it's okay to do it again and again. I think we want to move towards an ideal, but considering that it is up on the bluff and all of those reasons, it's a should, not a shall, then yes, I will withdraw that motion.
You agree? Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder for the alternate recommendation on page 107 that I just read. Mover and a seconder, moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. The next report we have is the appointment of election officers. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Beale. Mrs. Kaler, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding the appointment of election officers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to request that Council appoint the Chief and Deputy Chief Election Officers for the City of Parksville's 2016 by-election. Section 54 of the Local Government Act states that Council must appoint the election officers, and then that essentially starts a series of legislative timelines, resulting in the by-election being required to be held within 80 days of the election officers' appointments. The recommendations are per the agenda.
Could we vote on them all at the same time, Mrs. Comas? Okay. I have a mover and a seconder. Any questions for the Mrs. Kaler? No? We're ready to vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. We have another unsightly property. The pictures say 1,000 words. I don't know if Mrs. Kaler needs to give us an update on the issue. I would say not, Council. We've seen the pictures. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Any questions for Mrs. Kaler? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Budget timelines. Mrs. Comas. I need a mover and a seconder before I go to Mrs. Comas. Do I move it by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale? Mrs. Comas?
Yes, Your Worship. Staff are starting work on the 2017 Provisional Financial Plan and have set out a schedule of meetings to begin the public consultation in November, on the understanding that timelines can be fluid and subject to amendment, but we wanted to give Council an indication of the fact that we've started working on it already and that when we would be in a position to bring it forward to you.
So Murphy's Law, if anything can go wrong, it might go wrong, but we'll at least you've got a schedule. Okay. Any questions for Mrs. Comas? Fairly straightforward. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. We now move on to new business, and if you indulge me for a moment, Council, I just have one item under new business, which I've left on your desks this evening, and it's the recently signed cooperation protocol between the Qualicum First Nation and the Regional District of Nanaimo, and I just give you that for information. We are dealing, and we will be dealing with the Qualicum First Nation and the Nanoose First Nations at some point in time as we move along, and this is something that we may want to consider and look at, and I'll come back from letting everybody read it, give everybody time, and we can talk about it as time permits. I sat on the task force that worked on this, and we sat with the entire council of the Qualicum First Nation and the RDN board, and it went, we had a number of meetings and discussed it in detail, and there you have the end result. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, Councillor Patterson, anything under new business for you?
Thank you, Your Worship. As it is a busy time in the summer, a lot of my liaison appointments have taken a break. But under new business, I'd like to put forward a call for poverty reduction plan for BC, and if I could read it out, thank you. But I'm going to give a little background because this goes back to 2010, to a previous term in office, and myself.
It fits in with Dr. Hasselback's presentation this evening.
It most definitely does. So one, whereas the poverty rate in British Columbia continues to be among the highest in Canada at approximately 1 in 10, using the most conservative estimate low-income cutoff after tax, and child poverty rates in BC are still 1 in 5. And whereas many aspects of poverty are experienced at the local level, and local residents pay for poverty in increased healthcare costs, higher crime, higher demand for community, social, and charitable services, lack of school readiness, reduced school success, and lower economic productivity. And whereas 78% of British Columbians want the provincial government to implement a poverty reduction plan, and whereas BC is the last province in Canada to have a commitment to a poverty reduction plan, now therefore be it resolved that Parksville City Council advocate to the provincial government to develop and implement a provincial poverty reduction strategy to reduce the number of people living in poverty in BC by setting concrete targets and timelines to reduce poverty. And be it further resolved that Parksville City Council support the resolution that will be brought to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities in September of 2016, urging the Government of BC to adopt a comprehensive and accountable provincial poverty reduction strategy to reduce the number of people living in poverty in BC by setting concrete targets and timelines to reduce poverty. Thank you. No, not this time.
Councillor Powell.
I would like to say that I attended the PDBA meeting last week, one day. And I forgot my computer, so I don't have the notes, so I'll report on it next week, or the next meeting.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you. I would just like to share that although it's not an official committee that I'm a liaison to, I do attend on behalf of the city the Oceanside Health and Wellness Network, which was referred to by Dr. Hasselback as well. And I do think that at some point in the future, it would be nice to have someone from the network, now that there is a coordinator, come and present